The Monkey's Paw by W. W. Jacobs, adapted by Jerry Hunter, and narrated by Richard Ferrone. 1. Outside, the night was cold and wet. In the small living room of Laburnum Villa, the curtains were closed and the fire was burning brightly. A father and son were playing chess. An old lady was sewing by the fire. The father moved a chess piece and instantly realized he had made a mistake. He did not want his son to notice, so he spoke. "Listen to the wind," Mr. White said. "I'm listening," said the son. He moved a piece and said, "Checkmate." "I doubt that our guest will come tonight," Mr. White said. He started to move a chess piece. "No, father," replied the young man. "Checkmate. I win." "I never have liked living here," Mr. White said loudly. "We are so far away from everything. Of all the wild, terrible, far-away places, this place is the worst. The path is full of mud, and the road is like a river." "Never mind, dear," said his wife gently. "Perhaps you'll win the next game." Mr. White looked at her quickly. He hid a guilty smile in his thin gray beard. The gate outside closed loudly. They heard heavy footsteps. "There he is," Herbert White said to his father. The old man rose quickly and opened the front door. The guest was a tall, strong man with eyes like dark jewels and a bright red face. Mr. White introduced him. "This is Sergeant Major Morris." The sergeant major shook hands and sat down next to the fire. Mr. White took out whiskey in glasses. After the third glass of whiskey, the sergeant major's eyes became brighter. He straightened his broad shoulders and began to talk more easily. He told stories of wild scenes, wars, illnesses, and strange people. "He has had 21 years of adventures," said Mr. White, smiling at his wife and son. "When he went away, he was only a thin boy. Now look at him." "He seems to be in good health," said Mrs. White politely. "I'd like to go to India, too," said old Mr. White. "You know, only to look around and see some things." "It's better to stay here," said the sergeant major, shaking his head. He put down the empty glass, looked solemnly at the floor, and shook his head again. "I would like to see those old temples and holy men," said Mr. White. "You mentioned a monkey's paw in our conversation a few days ago, Morris. What were you talking about?" "Nothing," the soldier said quickly. "At least nothing important." "Monkey's paw?" asked Mrs. White. "Well, perhaps it's magic," the sergeant major said strangely. His three listeners leaned forward to hear better. The soldier lifted his empty glass to his lips, then put it down again. The old man filled the glass for him. The sergeant major searched in his pocket. "When you look at it," he said, "it's only an ordinary little paw. It's dry, like a dead leaf." He took something out of his pocket and showed it to the family. Mrs. White moved away with disgust on her face. Her son, however, took the paw and looked at it curiously. "What is special about it?" asked Mr. White. He took the paw from Herbert, looked at it carefully, then placed it upon the table. "An old holy man put magic on the paw," the sergeant major said. "He wanted to show that fate rules people's lives. Troubles will come to anyone who tries to control fate. The paw gives 3 wishes each to 3 different people." The sergeant major's listeners laughed quietly. "Well, why don't you make 3 wishes, sir?" Herbert asked. The soldier looked at the young man. "I made my wishes," he said finally, and his red face turned white. "And did your wishes really come true?" asked Mrs. White. "Yes, they came true," said the sergeant major. He tapped his glass against his strong teeth. "And has anybody else wished?" the old lady quickly asked. "Yes. The first man had his 3 wishes," the soldier answered. "I don't know his first 2 wishes, but the 3rd wish was for death. After that, I received the paw." "If you've had your 3 wishes, it's useless to you, Morris," the old man said. "Why do you keep it?" The soldier shook his head. "I keep it as a habit, I suppose," he said slowly. "I thought about selling it, but I won't do that. It has already caused enough trouble. Besides, people won't buy it. Some don't believe the story. Others want to make a wish first and pay me later." The old man looked carefully at Morris. "Do you want to have 3 more wishes?" he said. "I don't know," said Morris. "I don't know." The soldier picked up the paw from the table. Suddenly he threw it into the fire. Mr. White cried out and quickly pulled the object out of the fire. "It should burn," Morris said solemnly. "If you don't want it," said Mr. White, "give it to me." "I won't do that," Morris said firmly. "I threw it into the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for your troubles. Be a smart man and burn it." The old man shook his head and looked at the paw closely. "How do you make a wish?" he asked. "Hold it up in your right hand and say your wish out loud," said the sergeant major. "But I am warning you. The results of your wish will be terrible." "This sounds like a story for children," said Mrs. White. She began to serve dinner. "I am very busy and need some help. Can't you wish for 4 pairs of hands for me?" Her husband took the paw from his pocket, and the family began to laugh. Frightened, the sergeant major grabbed the old man's arm. "If you must wish," he said loudly, "wish for something noble." Mr. White dropped the paw into his pocket and invited his friend to the table. During dinner, no one spoke about the paw. After eating, the soldier told more tales about his adventures in India. Later, Morris left to catch the last train. Herbert closed the door behind their guest. "The sergeant major's stories were difficult to believe," Herbert said, "especially the story of the monkey's paw." "Did you give Morris any money for that paw, dear?" asked Mrs. White. "I paid a small amount," he said with a red face. "Morris didn't want the money, but I told him to take it. He told me again to throw it away." Herbert laughed and said, "We're going to be rich and famous and happy. Father, wish to be a king. Then you will have fewer troubles from Mother." Mrs. White laughed and chased Herbert around the table. Mr. White took the paw from his pocket and looked at it. "I don't know what to wish for," he said slowly. "It seems to me that I have everything I want." "You would like to have the house paid for, wouldn't you?" asked Herbert. His hand was on his father's shoulder. "Well, wish for £200 and pay the debt." Mr. White smiled and held up the magic object. Herbert winked at his mother. He sat down at the piano and started playing loudly. "I wish for 200 pounds, said the old man clearly. Herbert struck the piano keys with a crash. The old man gave a terrible shout. His wife and son ran towards him. "It moved," he said. The paw lay on the floor. "When I wished, the paw twisted in my hand like a snake." Herbert picked up the paw and placed it on the table. "Well, I don't see the money," he said. "I don't believe it will come." "It was only your imagination, dear," said Mrs. White. The old man shook his head. "Don't worry. Everything's fine, but I was surprised for a moment." The family sat down by the fire again. Herbert and his father smoked their pipes. Outside, the wind was stronger than before. A door upstairs closed suddenly, and the old man looked up. The family sat, strangely silent. Finally, the old couple rose to go to bed. "Good night," said Herbert. "The money will be in a big bag in the middle of your bed," he laughed. "And a terrible creature will watch you from the darkness." His parents laughed at the joke, then they went upstairs. Herbert sat in the dark room. The fire was dying, and he saw faces in the flames. The last face was like an evil monkey. Herbert looked at it with astonishment. He reached for the monkey's paw and touched it lightly. Trembling, Herbert wiped his hand on his shirt and went up to bed. Two. The next morning, the winter sun shone on the breakfast table. Herbert laughed at his fears. The room was warm and comfortable. The dirty paw lay on a shelf. It seemed harmless in the bright morning light. "I suppose all old soldiers are the same," said Mrs. White. "Why did we listen to that man's silly stories? How can a monkey's paw bring wishes to people? And how could 200 pounds hurt you, dear? Perhaps the money will fall on Father's head from the sky," Herbert joked. "Morris said the wishes happen naturally," said Mr. White. "They seem like ordinary luck." "Well, don't spend the money before I return from work," said Herbert. He stood up from the table. His mother laughed and followed him to the door. She watched as he walked down the road. Throughout the morning, she joked about her husband's worries, but when the mailman knocked, she ran quickly to the door. He handed an envelope to her. It was only a bill. Mrs. White made a comment under her breath about the sergeant major's drinking habits. Much later, the old couple sat down for dinner. "Herbert will make more jokes about the paw when he comes home," said Mrs. White. "Yes, I'm sure," said Mr. White. He poured some beer. "But that paw moved in my hand when I wished. I swear it did." "You thought that it moved," the old lady said calmly. "I'm sure that it moved," answered her husband. "I felt it in my hand. What's wrong, dear?" His wife did not answer. She was watching a strange man outside. The man was looking at the house. Mrs. White noticed the stranger's expensive clothes. She remembered the 200 pounds. The man stopped at the gate 3 times, then walked away again. The 4th time, he stood with his hand upon the gate. Suddenly, he opened it firmly and walked up the path. Mrs. White moved to open the door. She brought the stranger into the room, but he seemed uncomfortable and did not look at her. "My employers asked me to come here," he said slowly. "I come from the cotton factory of Maw and Megan's." Mrs. White's eyes grew round. "That is the factory where Herbert works," she said breathlessly. "Is something wrong? Has anything happened to Herbert? What is it? What is it?" Her husband interrupted. "It's okay, dear, it's okay." Mr. White looked at the other man and said, "Sir, I'm sure you haven't brought bad news, have you?" "I'm sorry," began the visitor. "Is my son hurt?" the mother demanded. The visitor silently nodded his head. "He is badly hurt," he said quietly, "but he is not in pain." "Oh, thank God," said the old woman, pressing her hands together. "Thank God for that. Thank—" She stopped suddenly as she understood what the man meant. The visitor turned his face away from her. Mrs. White held her breath and laid her hand on her husband's hand. There was a long silence in the room. "Herbert fell into one of the machines," the visitor said in a low voice. "Herbert fell into one of the machines," repeated Mr. White like a man in a dream. "Yes, I understand." He held his wife's hand between his own hands. "Herbert was the only child we had," Mr. White said. "This is terrible news." The visitor coughed, rose to his feet, and walked slowly to the window. "The factory understands this terrible loss," he said without looking at them. "I must say," he continued, "that the factory does not claim responsibility for the accident. However, your son was an employee, and the owners want to offer you some money." Mr. White dropped his wife's hand and looked at the visitor with horror. His lips were dry when he said, "How much money?" £200 was his answer. The old man did not hear his wife's terrible cry. He smiled slightly and put his hand forward like a blind man. Then he fainted, dropping to the floor in a heap. Three. The cemetery was 2 miles away from the house. The old couple buried their son and returned sadly to their home. The house was full of shadows and silence. The days slowly passed. The man and woman rarely talked. They felt tired at the end of each long day. One night, about a week later, the old man woke suddenly. He stretched out his hand and could not find his wife. The room was dark, and he heard the sound of crying. The old man sat on the bed and listened. "Come back to bed," he said softly to his wife. "You will be cold." "The ground is colder for my son," said the old woman, and she cried harder. The old man was tired. The bed was warm, and his eyes were heavy with sleep. He slept again until a wild cry woke him. "The paw!" shouted the old woman. "The monkey's paw!" "Where? Where is it?" the old man said nervously. "What's the matter?" "I want the paw," she said. "You haven't burned it, have you?" "It's downstairs in the living room, on the shelf," he replied. "Why?" She cried and laughed at the same time, bent over and kissed his cheek. "I only thought of it right now," she said excitedly. "Why didn't I think of it before? Why didn't you think of it before?" "Think of what?" he asked. "The other 2 wishes. We've had only one." "One wish was not enough?" he demanded angrily. "No," she said. "We'll have one more wish. Go downstairs and get the paw quickly. With one wish, Herbert can be alive again." The old man jumped out of bed. His arms and legs were shaking, and his face was white. "My God, you are crazy," he said. "Get the paw," his wife said in a heavy voice. "Get it quickly and make a wish. Oh, my boy, my poor boy." Her husband struck a match and lit the candle. "Come back to bed," he said with a shaky voice. "You are confused." "The first wish came true for us," the old woman said almost angrily. "The second wish will also come true." "The money was a coincidence," the old man said. "Go and get the paw and make a wish," said his wife. She was trembling with excitement. The old man turned and looked at her. "Herbert has been dead for 10 days. Besides that, I'm sorry, but I have to tell you, when I went to get the body, I only knew him by his clothes. He was caught in the factory machinery. He will look even worse now." "Bring him back," the old woman said fiercely. She dragged her husband toward the stairs. "Do you think I fear my own child?" The old man went downstairs in the darkness. He moved slowly into the living room, then to the shelf. When he found the paw in its place, he was filled with fear. He turned to leave the room, but he could not see the door. His face was cold with sweat as he felt the table and moved forward. He touched the wall and walked slowly until he was in the narrow hall. He was still holding the disgusting paw in his hand. His wife's face seemed changed when he entered the bedroom. She was white and unnatural, with a wild look in her eyes. The old man was afraid of her. "Wish," she said in a strong voice. "But it is a foolish and wicked idea," he said weakly. "Wish," repeated his wife. He raised his hand and said, "I wish for my son to be alive again." The paw fell to the floor, and the old man looked at it fearfully. He trembled and sank into a chair. The old woman walked to the window and pulled back the curtains. The candle's flame danced. The light threw shadows on the ceiling and walls. The candle burned down, and the shadows became larger. Eventually, it burned out. Nothing had happened. The old man returned to his bed. After a minute or two, the old woman crawled into bed beside him. Neither of them spoke. They listened to the sound of the clock. A stair creaked, and a mouse ran noisily through the wall. Suddenly, the old man could no longer stand the darkness. He struck a match and went downstairs to find another candle. At the foot of the stairs, the match went out. The old man tried to strike another one. At the same moment, there was a quiet knock on the front door. The matches fell from the old man's hand and spilled in the hall. He stood without moving or breathing. Then the knock sounded again. He turned, ran quickly up the stairs to his room, and closed the door. A third knock sounded loudly through the house. "What's that?" the old woman said in surprise. "It was a rat," said the old man in a shaking voice. "It was only a rat. It passed me on the stairs." His wife sat up in bed and listened. A loud knock shook the house. "It's Herbert!" she screamed. "It's Herbert!" She ran to the bedroom door, but her husband was in front of her. He caught her arm and held her tightly. "What are you going to do?" he whispered weakly. "It's my boy! It's Herbert!" she shouted and struggled with her husband. "Herbert didn't come earlier because the cemetery is 2 miles away. Why are you holding me? Let me go! I must open the door." "My God, don't let it into the house," said the old man, trembling. "You're afraid of your own son," she said. "Let me go. I'm coming, Herbert, I'm coming." There was another knock, and another. The old woman suddenly tore free from her husband and ran from the room. The old man followed to the top of the stairs. He heard his wife take the chain off the front door. The lock at the bottom of the door was heavy. She turned it slowly and with difficulty. "Come downstairs," she said to her husband. "I can't reach the lock at the top of the door." But the old man was on his hands and knees searching wildly for the paw. If he could only find it before the thing got inside the house. The knocking was now loud and constant. He heard his wife push a chair against the door. He heard her slowly turn the lock. At that moment, he found the monkey's paw. Quickly, he whispered his third and final wish. For a moment, the house was silent. Then the man heard his wife move the chair and fling open the door. A cold wind rushed up the stairs, and the woman let out a loud, long cry. He ran to her side, then out to the gate in front of the house. The tall street lamp shone on a quiet and empty road. The end.